Glorfindel was one of the mightiest and most noble elves of Arda, whose legendary deeds and accomplishments would be long remembered in history and song. He is best known for his duel with the Balrog of Morgoth, one of the few examples of a warrior of the Free People who was able to hold his own against such a fearsome foe. Hey guys, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be exploring the entire history of Glorfindel, the Lord of the Golden Flower. So much of Glorfindel's early life is enshrouded in mystery, and very little is known about his family and heritage. He was born sometime during the Years of the Trees, and he was one of the Noldor Elves that lived in the blessed realm of Valinor, the Undying Lands. Even back then, he was known to be an elf who had a high and noble spirit, a good indication of the great deeds that he would accomplish during his lifetime, and he bore an incredible loyalty and love for his kinsman called Turgon. Now, despite the bliss and beauty of Valinor, some of the Noldor Elves that were led by Fëanor chose to forsake these lands to travel to Middle-Earth, in defiance of the authority of the Valar, and Turgon was among these rebels. At first, Glorfindel was reluctant to join this rebellion, perhaps because he saw clearly the foolishness and pride of his people, though his loyalty to Turgon would drive him to act against his better judgment, and he eventually gave in. This rebellion would go down a dark path, for they needed boats to cross the Great Sea to Middle-Earth, and the exiled Noldor could not make their own in time, and so they chose to commit an atrocious deed, and they attacked the peaceful Teleri Elves, massacring them to steal their boats, a terrible act known as the kinslaying of Alqualonde. Even though he was part of this rebellion, Glorfindel refused to take part in such a horrific act, and Glorfindel and Turgon were among the Noldor that would be left stranded upon the shores of Valinor, for after Fëanor reached the lands of Middle-Earth, he burnt all of the Teleri boats, betraying many of his people and leaving them behind. The stranded Noldor now faced a very difficult choice. They could either go back to Valinor in shame and face judgment for their actions, or brave the perilous spot known as Helcaraxe, an icy, cold wasteland that connected the lands of Middle-Earth to the continent of Aman. Despite this grim crossing, the Noldor refused to turn back and abandon their journey, no matter what lay ahead of them, and so they set forth to cross the Helcaraxe, a journey that would claim many of their lives. Yet no matter their flaws, the Noldor were still a mighty and valorous people, and through their strong perseverance and after overcoming many hardships, they managed to finally reach the shores of Middle-Earth. Glorfindel would follow his friend Turgon and his people to the lands of Nevrast, where they settled for a while in the city of Vinyamar, though they eventually abandoned this settlement in the year 116 of the First Age to establish the great kingdom of Gondolin under the rule of King Turgon. The city was divided into 12 noble houses, and as a reward for the great loyalty that he had shown towards Turgon, Glorfindel was appointed as the chief of the House of the Golden Flower, and he chose to use the symbol of a rayed sun as his house crest. Since Gondolin's location was hidden from Morgoth and his forces, its people were spared from the many terrible wars of Middle-Earth, and this peace allowed it to prosper and become one of the greatest elven cities in the land. Yet not everyone was happy, isolated behind its walls, and one such elf was Aredhel, the sister of King Turgon. She missed the freedom and life that she had in Valinor, the feeling of walking in the green forests and riding out in the vast open plains of land, and she finally decided to leave this city in the year 316 of the First Age to visit the sons of Fëanor who had been her childhood friends. This was a dangerous journey, for the lands outside of Gondolin were wild and filled with the servants of Morgoth, and so King Turgon appointed Glorfindel and 2 other elves of his household to ride out with his sister and ensure her safety. Now the sons of Fëanor lived in the land of Himlad, and the safest way for Glorfindel and his company to reach this land was through the elven realm of Doriath. However, many of the Noldor were banned from entering this land, and so they were forced to travel on a shorter but much more dangerous path that lay between the haunted valleys of Aredhel and the northern fences of Doriath. At first, their journey seemed to be going well, though when they approached the evil valley of Noldor, they were suddenly surrounded by shadows, and Aredhel was lost in this darkness. They tried to find her, spending hours searching for her in this darkness, for they still hoped to fulfill their duty to their king, though enemies were starting to creep up upon them in the form of the spider children of Ungoliant, and Glorfindel and his companions had no choice but to abandon their search and return to Gondolin to deliver the sad news to King Turgon that his sister was missing and that her fate was unknown. Now the Elves of Gondolin would finally emerge from their self-exile in the year 472 of the First Age to help the Free People in the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and the army of Gondolin consisted of 10,000 soldiers, including Glorfindel, who was a captain in their forces. Though they fought bravely, the Free People were overwhelmed by Morgoth's forces, which included the dreadful Balrogs and the dragon Glaurung, and Glorfindel was tasked with guarding the left flank of the army of Gondolin as the survivors retreated back to their kingdom. For now, they were safe and hidden in Gondolin once more, though the safety wouldn't last much longer, for an elf of Gondolin called Maiglin betrayed his people, and he shared its secret location with Morgoth, and in the year 510, Morgoth unleashed a massive army upon this kingdom. Not even the walls of Gondolin could stop this great army, and they breached its northern gate, and they poured into the city. In an attempt to hold back this onslaught, Glorfindel rallied the men of his household, and he led them through the eastern part of the city, taking a longer path to the gate to ambush Morgoth's forces upon their left flank. Though as they were passing through the great market of Gondolin, they were ambushed by an army of orcs led by Balrogs, and so they couldn't reinforce their allies in time. As they fought their new foes in a bitter battle for many hours, it was clear to Glorfindel that they couldn't hold them off for much longer unless help arrived, and so he sent out messengers to King Turgon begging him for reinforcements, and King Turgon ordered the Lord of the Men of the Harp called Salgant to lead his men and come to Glorfindel's aid, though once again Gondolin was betrayed and Salgant lied to his warriors, telling them that their orders were to reinforce the lesser markets instead. Glorfindel and his forces were abandoned, and to make matters worse, a terrible fire drake was now rampaging through the great market. Their only hope was to retreat back to the Square of the King, where the rest of the warriors of the other noble houses were gathering to make a final stand, and Glorfindel led the survivors of his household as they cut a path through their enemies to the square. Even with all these noble warriors gathered together, it became clear that Morgoth's forces would soon overwhelm the final defenses of Gondolin, and the only way to survive this onslaught was to flee the city and continue resisting Morgoth elsewhere. Many of these refugees escaped through a secret path which led up into the highest part of the northern mountains, and Glorfindel and his warriors protected their retreat, and they held off Morgoth's forces before they joined the rest of the survivors in the mountains above. And yet, even after all these hardships, their ordeal was not over, for they had to now climb the cold and terrible mountain pass known as Kirit Toranath, a narrow passage besides a gaping abyss. Now before his attack upon Gondolin, Morgoth had ordered some of his orcs and the Balrog to encircle the city and watch over the mountains, and when they spotted the refugees, they descended upon them. Once more, it would be up to Glorfindel and his warriors to hold off Morgoth's forces while the survivors crossed this perilous path, though the Balrog outsmarted them, and it leapt past Glorfindel, reaching the front line of the refugees, and it lashed out at them with its whip of fire. Their situation looked desperate, and in that hour of need, the valor of Glorfindel saved them, for he charged at the Balrog and fought it in a legendary duel. His armor protected him from the Balrog's whip and claws, and Glorfindel managed to injure it by cutting off its whip arm and stabbing its abdomen with a dagger. As it shrieked and reared up in pain and torment, the Balrog fell backwards into the abyss. Though as it fell, it managed to grab a hold of Glorfindel's hair, and it dragged him down with it to their death below. The great eagles would retrieve Glorfindel's body, and he was buried beside this mountain pass under a great stone cairn, upon which green turf and yellow flowers bloomed thereafter, and the memory of Glorfindel and his legendary sacrifice and duel would be remembered in song. Now after his death, Glorfindel's spirit returned to the halls of Mandos, where all of his deeds were judged, and his spirit would be cleansed and healed from the mistakes and guilt of its past, such as the Noldor Rebellion. Since Glorfindel had refused to take part in their evil deeds, such as the kinslaying, his guilt was small, and while his spirit was redeemed, it was instructed and allowed to rebuild the body it possessed from memory and live once more in the Undying Lands. Considering that Gondolin was destroyed and almost all of its people had perished, Glorfindel had little reason to return to Middle-Earth, and he chose to remain in the blessed realm of Valinor, where he became a powerful figure and almost angelic being, for he would spend the next 1,600 years or so among the Maiar and the elves that had remained loyal to the Valar, and through his act of self-sacrifice, his spiritual power was greatly enhanced, and he had almost become an equal to the Maiar. At some point, probably early in his return to Valinor, he became a close friend and follower of Gandalf, and some of Tolkien's early writings suggest that Glorfindel joined Gandalf on his journey to Middle-Earth in the year 1000 of the Third Age. However, he also wrote that it's far more likely that Glorfindel was sent to Middle-Earth in the Second Age, possibly as early as the year 1100, or more probably around the year 1600, together with the Blue Wizards. It's believed that his mission was to help Elrond with the crisis of the Second Age against Sauron, and even though his name was not recorded in Sauron's defeat, it is said that he played a notable and heroic part in this war. Glorfindel would also play a part in the war against the Witch King of Angmar, for he led a force out of Rivendell to join Eärnur, the Prince of Gondor, and together they utterly defeated the Witch King's forces, and they freed the northern lands of Arnor. Glorfindel's steed was the only one that could withstand the Witch King's malice, probably due to his enhanced spiritual power, and the Witch King fled before him, rather than face this powerful elven warrior. Prince Eärnur wanted to pursue the Witch King, though Glorfindel managed to convince him not to, and in that hour he uttered the famous words of the Witch King's prophecy: "Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hands of man will he fall." During the War of the Ring, Elrond chose Glorfindel as one of the riders that were sent out to find Frodo and bring him back to Rivendell, for he was deemed to be strong enough to resist the Nazgul. As he traveled the wilds, he came across 5 of the Nazgul, though they fled before him, and he was the rider that found the trail of Aragorn and the hobbits. Glorfindel would use his elven magic to slow down the corruption that was spreading throughout Frodo from his Morgul wound, which gave Frodo some relief, though it was beyond his ability to heal it completely, and so they rode together swiftly towards Rivendell upon Glorfindel's horse called Asphalot, hoping to reach Elrond in time to heal Frodo's malady, and even though the Nazgul pursued them, they were no match for the speed of Glorfindel's steed. Glorfindel would later take part in the Council of Rivendell, and in his wisdom, he knew that they couldn't send the ring to Tom Bombadil, and he stated that they had 2 choices: to either destroy the One Ring, or throw it and lose it forever in the sea. Elrond had considered picking Glorfindel as a member of the Fellowship, though since their hope lay in secrecy rather than outright battle, Merry and Pippin were chosen instead. We don't know much about his fate after Sauron's defeat, apart from his journey to Gondor along with the rest of Elrond's household, and it's uncertain whether he remained in Middle-Earth or chose to return to the Undying Lands. I feel the latter is more likely, for with Sauron's defeat, his mission was complete, and he had no reason to remain in the lands of Middle-Earth, and it would be far more fitting for him to return to Valinor and enjoy its bliss, and be reunited with his old companions. Anyway friends, This wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Glorfindel. Where do you think he stands in power compared to the other elves of Middle-Earth, such as Elrond and Galadriel? And how essential do you think he was to the story? As always, if you're interested, check out our Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and some of our affiliate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-Earth.